So when I say content, what usually comes to mind? Is it this? Or is it more like this? What about content for your business? Do you think of blogs and tweets and emails? The reality is, most entrepreneurs think of content as marketing. It's a tool to convince potential customers to use or purchase your products or services. Furthermore, if your business is early stage, if you're really worried about product prototypes and hiring and raising capital, then you're probably not thinking much about content at all. But really, what I'm here to say is content is much, much more than what you probably think it is. It's everything that you search for. It's how you learn anything. It's deciding who to trust. It's both the work that you create and what you do when you don't want to work. It's the stories that you share with others and the scripts that you tell yourself. It affects your mood and your outlook, and it inspires you. It's how you convey a very specific and nuanced emotion, and it's even influencing your conception of right from wrong. What I'm really trying to say is, it's important to isolate the form of content from its impact. Content is much more than just marketing. It's something that attracts and annoys and convinces and disgusts and delights and everything in between. So I've spent my entire career thinking about the impact of content. I worked at Disney creating strategies for emerging platforms. I led business and operations for YouTube Originals and headed up the global creator programs for YouTube's innovation team. I started an independent digital studio that produced Emmy-nominated internet TV shows, and now I run a content strategy firm that works with companies to help them both develop and execute a content mindset. What is a content mindset? It's distilling the best practices and principles from the world's foremost content companies and applying it to your business. So let me share a little bit of what that means. Principle number 1, everybody has a story. Literally everybody. You just have to find yours. Don't believe me? Let's look at reality television. There's literally, I did a bunch of research here, and literally there are TV shows about teenage mothers, strangers living in a house together, people pitching business ideas, truckers, wrestlers, pawn shop owners, real estate developers, cheerleaders, duck hunters, dermatologists, airline employees, 36 different shows about law enforcement, 12 different shows about housewives, and the list goes on and on. Turns out, all these people have stories. So the learning would be, you can fashion a story out of probably anything. But I'll admit, these stories may not be that compelling or that authentic. You're not really seeing reality TV win any awards these days. So let's take a slightly different approach. Here are some great movies and TV shows in which nothing much happens. Of course, Seinfeld is sort of the prototypical example of this. It is a show about nothing, and yet it's one of the most influential sitcoms of all time. Learning, a good story doesn't need a good plot. What if we moved away from scripted content? Here are just a few of the documentaries that emerged out of footage that was shot with no clue about the direction that the story would ultimately take. In fact, I think a lot of documentaries are shot that way. So the learning here would be great stories will come from unexpected places. You just have to be diligent about searching for them, and you have to give them room to breathe. Also, I think it's important to remember that there are times where it's less about what you say and more about how you say it. When I was at YouTube, we found out that personality often, I mean not always, but often trumped things like plot or production value. So massive audiences will tune in to watch somebody complain about their day or play video games or even open boxes if that person had a good personality. Maybe it's the stories of your employees. Did you know that employees can have up to 10 times as many followers on social media as the companies they work for, and the content that they share will have 8 times as much engagement as the companies they work for. Your employees humanize your company. Maybe it's the stories of your community. There's no shame in leveraging your audience's stories. In fact, I think the role of the curator is sometimes as crucial as the role of the creator. As it turns out, many people actually trust user-generated content more than they trust what comes out of the company's mouth. And let me finish this section by a couple of more pro moves. There are times when you have to craft the story. That's how we end up with the story of razor blades told through a giant dancing bear, and the story of mattresses told through cuddly baby animals. That's my favorite. Last but not least, sometimes it's just embracing something brand spanking new. How many people here have heard of Zombies Run? Oh, we got a couple. So if any of you guys know me, I hate exercising, but when I put in my headphones and turn on this app, I become a runner in a post-apocalyptic world where zombies are chasing me, and I have to outrun them and solve these mysteries. So not only is this a well-written story, it also uses the GPS and accelerometer on my phone to incorporate speed and distance into the story so that so I'm actually running away from zombies. But the most important thing is it actually gets me to exercise, so that is quite a feat. And then a second example here is a couple weeks ago, someone on Twitter created a choose-your-own-adventure game based on trying to become Beyoncé's assistant. And it's basically really inane questions that you pick one choice or the other. This one is like, do you give her a healthy breakfast or an unhealthy breakfast, and then you might get fired if you choose either option. And hundreds of thousands of people played this game, and it's built on top of Twitter's platform. It's meant to be kind of a crude game, but really I think it's a good example of how creativity can drive storytelling in completely non-traditional ways. There you have it. Everybody has a story. Second principle: telling your story is important in more ways than you think. So we've already talked a little bit about the role of traditional media in impacting how people think about different things. So let's look a little bit more at what your business content can do. Your business content can be used to attract potential customers into the top of your funnel. I think this is pretty obvious. But how about the impact it can have on educating and inspiring your current customers? It could also help you stay on top of mind for your past customers. It allows them to build affinity for your brand. It can do the job of qualifying whether some prospective customers are the right fit for your sales. Speaking of sales, content can arm your salespeople with the right talking points. For sales to truly be effective, everybody in the company needs to be telling the same story. It can provide context to investors. This is how investors can understand your proposition, and this is how they can introduce you to other people in their network, by pointing to your content. It can be used to rally employees around your cause. There's the classic story of how Disney started, actually. Keep in mind that prior to Disney, there were no feature-length animated feature films, so movies. In 1934, Walt Disney actually sat all of his animators down in a room and proceeded to reenact, scene by scene, every part of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, including the voices for each of the dwarfs. It took him multiple hours to do this, but what he managed to do was convince all of these animators to create this thing that's never been created before. And it took them almost 4 years to do that. And the rest is history. This is such a good example of using content to encourage and inspire your employees. Content can also be an effective recruiting tool, and it can be used to test your user proposition, solicit feedback, and iterate on your product. And last but not least, this is a little cheesy, but content can really help you put into words what you believe. It certainly helped me do that a lot. It's such a great way to organize my thoughts and to figure out what is actually my North Star. At the end of the day, content allows you to talk to all of these different constituents at the same time. So published content scales perfectly. All right, principle number 3, don't underestimate your audience. So NerdWallet did this really interesting study a while back where it mapped for 475 individual films and that make up 130 series, it mapped Rotten Tomato user ratings against box office performance for all these sequels. And if you look at the trend line, I think the learning here is you're not the only person who hated that last sequel that you saw. Of course, some of this may be due to higher than expected expectations for sequels, but there's no denying that for a lot of franchises, producers are simply cashing in. This is a classic case of underestimating your audience. Audiences want to figure things out for themselves, not be force-fed the most obvious answer. This idea is best encapsulated in a 2012 TED Talk by Pixar director Andrew Stanton, and he says, and I quote, "Make the audience put things together. Give them four. Don't give them 4, give them 2 plus 2. Forget 2 plus 2 equals 4. We've seen plenty of cases of what frankly amazing feats internet audiences are capable of if they put their collective minds to it. So solving decades-old crime, preventing suicides, finding lost people, inciting political and social change. Whether that your audience is internet sleuthers or sequel watchers, doesn't pay to underestimate them. So what does this mean? The best content is subtle. It's a story that gets under your skin, and it engages your emotions and makes you really care. People don't fall in love with your product solely because of your product features. They fall in love with them because of how your product makes them feel. Use content to connect with people's emotions. Red Bull is the ultimate master of doing all this. Their product is barely shown in their content. Instead, they focus on their customer as their hero. Red Bull's content tells a story of personal achievement, of perseverance, of, frankly, insane feats. But it inspires viewers to imagine what's possible for themselves. And this is such an emotional connection that's deeply personal that it really appeals to a lot of people, even people who don't do extreme sports. In the same way, your content shouldn't be blatant tactics to get people to buy something. I see so many companies where their public blog consists of product updates, new hire announcements, press releases. You need to create for your audience, not for your brand. You should ask yourself, who are you in between your sales pitches? All right, principle number 4. Data will only get you so far. I know this one might be really hard to swallow. We've seen a lot of presentations today already about the importance of data. And I think everybody here is very used to making a data-driven decision and usually wants to find more data rather than less. Trust me, I understand. I've worked with companies where even upgrading a printer requires a data-driven analysis. I kid you not. But I'm here to tell you that for content, data will only get you so far. Even Netflix, the company that has been incredibly successful in using big data for content decisions, has said, and I quote, "It's 70% gut and 30% data. Most of it is informed hunches and intuition. Data either reinforces your worst notions or it just supports what you want to do," end quote. We can take House of Cards as the classic example. This was the first big show that Netflix greenlit, and they used 3 pieces of data to decide whether to greenlit the show. People really enjoyed David Fincher's The Social Network. They watched it all the way through. People watched the British version of House of Cards, and those that watched the British version of House of Cards also watched Kevin Spacey movies and movies by David Fincher. However, it's important to note that Netflix did not come up with the idea of House of Cards. They were pitched it, and once they made the greenlighting decision using the data that they had, they stepped away from the creative process and let creators make as good a show as possible. And in fact, they actually greenlit 2 whole seasons of House of Cards from the very beginning as a way to really remove themselves from the creative process. In the same way, use your data to inform your content strategy, not the content itself. You can only know so much about your customers from surveying or focus groups. The rest is connecting with them on an emotional level. Don't go down the path of demand media, a company that was once valued at more than the New York Times. They popularized the term content farm, in which case they use really specific search data to create content, but they spent almost no money on the content itself. And it showed. It showed not only to users, but to search engines and also to the market. Instead, the goal should be to create great content with taste. Taste is really what separates those who simply create with those who are truly creative. It's quality over quantity, it's using your gut, and it's the opposite of data. Taste is a huge topic that goes well beyond what we will cover in this presentation, but I'm happy to talk your ear off about it afterwards. What you can use data for is tactics. Netflix used it to create 10 different versions of its House of Cards trailer to serve to different audiences. So you've been A/B tested about everything that you watch on Netflix. Similarly, you should use data to measure the progress of your content against your goals, but just don't let that drive your content decision-making altogether. All right, just a quick recap. These are the 4 principles that I've covered. Now that we have, I'll let you guys take a picture. I know, I've been going through these pretty quickly. So now that you have the beginnings of a content mindset, how do you actually get started? What do you do next? Here's some lightning round tactical do's and don'ts. Do tap into where your perspective is unique and or deep. Do look at what your competitors are doing, because it's sometimes useful to have additional data on how the audience responds to different topics. But don't over-rely on what your competitors are doing, obviously. Do expand what you think content could be. I think this is really important. I think most people think of it as blog posts or tweets, but really, create a podcast, create a Twitter rant, create memes. Do curate your community. That means testimonials, case studies, guest posts, and maybe one day even a brand magazine, which is coming back into vogue, this idea of creating a print magazine for your brand. Don't forget to give credit where it's due. And don't rely too much on stock photography. That's underestimating your audience. And use effective calls to action. Lastly, do practice authenticity and brutal honesty. I think this was mentioned over and over again, I'm sure you've heard, but it's definitely the most important. And so that is how you get started. After this, figuring out what you want to do for yourself and what you want to outsource is the next step. Creating good content is not easy. There are many, many steps to get from point A to point B. As you can see here, rely on experts to build your core competency as well as your voice before you eventually bring something in-house and scale them. Because remember, at the end of the day, you are the protagonist of your own story, so make it a great one. Thanks.